Hello, my wonderful psychology students. Here we've got a nice little video that focuses on sampling. Remember, this will be in the research methods module. So what is a sample, or if we talk about sampling? Well, samplings are the groups of people that form part of the research study. So these are the people, the individuals that we're going to use in order for us to carry out a research. Now, there are different sampling techniques that we can use to obtain our sample. So it's really important. That's what we're going to investigate in this short little video. Now, we have a general population, and when we're doing research, we cannot do research on everybody. It would be humanly impossible when there's over 66 million people in Britain alone. It would be humanly impossible to do a research. So that means we've got to identify a target population. So our target population is a set of people that meet the criteria in what we want to investigate. So for example, if we were doing some research on the flirting behaviors of 16 to 18-year-olds, we have a clear target population. So that means we will target participants between the ages of 16 and 18 years old. We're not interested in the general population, everybody, because there's so many various ages. We're just really interested in the ages from 16 to 18. So we have our target. But again, looking here on the screen, there are still so many 16 to 18-year-olds. It would still take a very, very long time to actually do a piece of research that includes every 16 to 18-year-old. So from our target population, we will extract our sample. So that is a smaller group of individuals that represent our target population. And that is who we're going to use within our research. So that's what sampling is all about. It's getting this sample group of individuals that's going to be representative of our target population. Now, there are some terms here that you need to define. Well, sample, we've just spoke about what it is, target population. So again, you should be able to define what a target population is. And when we're looking at a sampling frame, do we have any ideas what we mean by a sampling frame? I'll give you a moment. Pause the video and see if you can come up. What do we mean by a sampling frame? Okay, have you worked out what a sampling frame is? It's a key term. This is especially associated with systematic sampling, is a list of people in the target population that you're going to be using. So for example, if we're looking at 16 to 18 years old, we need a sampling frame of where we're going to get those individuals from. So we might use the registers, the A-level registers from our school, from our sixth form. So we have our sampling frame. Sampling techniques. Sampling techniques are a group of methods that we use to obtain our sample. So we have different sampling techniques. And we have random, systematic, stratified, opportunity, and volunteer. These are known as our sampling techniques. It's the technique we're using to get our sample. Representative. Now, representative means that it clearly represents. So I always say to my students, don't use the word represent. So if we're looking at the idea of representativeness, we've got to look at, does the sample actually form a picture of who we're trying to investigate, what area that we are trying to identify. So representative. Does it represent our target population? And generalization. You already know what generalization means, being able to apply it beyond the research situation. So these are key things that we've also got to take into consideration when we are picking our sample. Is this sample going to represent our 16 to 18-year-olds? But meanwhile, we might only have 16-year-olds. So it's not really going to represent all the age groups. Generalization. Can we generalize it beyond to everyone, to the general population, or has it got restricted generalizability? So perhaps age bias there. So these are key terms that you need to know when we're looking at them. Now, sampling, each researcher, and no matter what science is, they want their sample to be representative of their target population. So in psychology, because it's human behavior, we want it to be, and each researcher strives to make it representative so that every type of person can actually be targeted within their research. So therefore, it's proportionally representative in the sample. That's what every researcher aims for. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen because there can be lots of restrictions. Now, please note, representation doesn't always have to link to the general population. It can be just representative of the target population. Have we got the right sample framework so that we can get people from each element that represents that properly? So it doesn't necessarily, like I've said there, have to represent the general population. Now, we have 5 sampling techniques. I am going to quickly go through this, but you do have that sheet that you should have filled out. So we have volunteer. Please note volunteer. Sampling can also be known as self-selected. The volunteer self-selected sampling is when a person puts themselves forward. So they may be responding to an advert they've seen in a newspaper, a poster on a notice board. So when we look at volunteer sample, it involves the participants themselves selecting themselves to be part of the sample. So they're actually putting themselves forward. So it's either volunteer or self-selected. Please become familiar with both terms. Now, a problem with volunteer samples, it can be rather volunteer biased. Because bias in the sense that perhaps it's only certain individuals that will see a specific advert in a newspaper or a specific poster, or actually they enjoy volunteering. Or the topic area, they may have a keen interest in that topic area, which motivates them to volunteer for it. So they might actually have, in essence, a little bit of a hidden agenda because they want to find out more about that specific. So it can be volunteer bias, and that is a problem. However, the nice thing about volunteer or self-selected sampling, it's quite easy to get your sample because there's not a lot of work for the researcher because all the researcher has to do is put up some posters, put an advert out there, and the researcher sits back. So it's less time consuming. It minimalizes the input that's needed from the researcher, and compared, not and if, but compared to other ones, which actually take a lot of time to get a sampling frame, to then extract and get the people to actually agree to be part. Here, people are putting themselves forward and they are keen to take part. Stratified sampling. Now, stratified, stratas, if you've done geography, you'll know the different stratas in the earth, the different layers within the research. And this is probably the most sophisticated sampling method or technique that we have because its aim is to get a representative sample of the different proportions of people within the different subgroups or the stratas of it. So let's go back to my example. I said we're looking at flirting behaviors of 16 to 18-year-olds. Now, if we're looking at our school, we might say, well, 50% of the 16 or 18-year-olds are made up of 16-year-olds. And then we might say 25% of 17-year-olds and 25% of 17-year-olds, of 18-year-olds. So if we looked at all the students and we worked out how many 16-year-olds and what percentage, we've got half of the group is made up of 16-year-olds. So a stratified says then half of your group needs to be made up of your sample group, needs to be made up of 16-year-olds. 25% of your sample needs to be made up of 17-year-olds, and 25% of your group needs to be made up of 18-year-olds, because then that truly represents your sample. So say, for example, we've got, let's see, 20, our sample of 20. So that means 10 of our sample need to be 16-year-olds, 5 need to be 17-year-olds, and 5 need to be 18-year-olds, because then it represents the break or the makeup of our target population. So stratified is very representative of it. Now, an issue with stratified methods is that it can't always reflect ways that people are different. Now, we're gone age, and that's quite easy, but there can be a lot of other differences that can impact on it. So it can be very difficult to get the breakdown of the different stratas to make sure it's fully representative. And that can be very time consuming and very costly, actually, to work this out. A strength of it, like I've said, it is very representative, because the researcher has taken the time and the effort to work out what the different stratas are and how much they represent in the target population, and then transpose that into the sample group. And it also avoids researcher bias, which is great. So yeah, we've got a lot of great strengths and limitations there. Now, random sampling. Now, random sampling is actually quite a sophisticated form of sampling in which the target population has the same and equal chances of being selected. Now, I'm bringing in a strength here as well. A strength here, it automatically minimizes researcher bias, because we randomly allocate our sample, right? So we choose. So we might have a target population of 100 people, right? Or our school registers, right? We take out all the names of the 16-year-olds, all the names of the 17-year-olds, and all the names of the 18-year-olds. And then we can then randomly pick out how many students that we need. So if we needed 20 students, we can then pull out 20 names of the random sample. Now, a problem with this is that it can actually be quite difficult to do it, and it can be very time consuming to conduct, as a complete list of the target population may be really difficult to get hold of. So it might be, it's not as easy as getting the registers from your school. It might be quite difficult to access that. But like I said, it's free from researcher bias, because he or she has no influence on who's going to be selected, because they're randomly selected. Right, so we're randomly selecting our sample. Remember that when we're randomly selecting our sample, we're selecting the people who are going to be involved, not who we're allocating to the different conditions. And also, and this is a problem with stratified and random. We might select a person, but they might refuse to take part. They say, no, I don't want to take part. Then you've got to go through that process again. So that's why it can be very time consuming. Opportunity sampling, like this says here, the opportunity arose, so we took it, right? I had the opportunity to go watch a movie because somebody gave me a ticket. It was there, I was available, and we used it. And we can apply that to sampling methods. An opportunity sample that are very difficult to obtain in the sense of them being representative. So we have a limitation there. But actually, it's the researcher may decide to select anybody. So they might not really have a target population. They might use the general population, walk up to people that look round about that age and ask them to volunteer. So yeah, so it might, again, limitation there, not very representative, because you might only get, a certain group. So if we were here in sixth form and I saw a class didn't have a teacher in and I wanted to do a piece of research, I might only get 16 and 17 years old. I don't get any 18-year-olds. So therefore it's not going to be completely representative. So we do have issues with that. And again, from a researcher's point of view, it's not that difficult to, it's not that difficult in the sense of setting up a sampling framework and the time and effort. The people are available, you use them. Systematic sampling is, I think, our final sampling technique that we're going to look at. And systematic sample is when every nth, right, every so many, that's what nth means, member of the target population is selected. So I might have all the lists of the registers of 16 to 18-year-old from our school, and then I might say every 8th or every 5th or every 10th or every 9th person I'm going to select. So you go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You circle or highlight that name, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So every 9th person is selected. Again, there is a problem because people say, nope, I don't want to take part. So it might be difficult to get them to agree. But it's very much that, but we do need a sampling frame for this one is produced, which is the list of people. Remember, it was a key term we looked at earlier, and I said it links very much to systematic sampling, is that we need a sampling frame. So that means we need a list of people that we can use. If we were looking at perhaps people that lived in Hessel or Bruff, we could go to the local council and ask for the electoral register and then count every 10th person and say we're going to try them because they come from that area, because we might be doing research for that area. So we need that sampling framework. Now, systematic sampling can avoid researcher bias, because if they're counting every nth person, 9th, 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th person, then it's not them thinking, oh, I like that name better than that name. They've got to stick with how many they're counting. So again, just like stratified sampling, it can avoid researcher bias. And so once that sampling framework has been established, the researcher has no influence at all. And usually then it can be quite representative of your target population. But remember, it can be difficult to actually get the people to partake in accepting to partake in it. So what you also, now I've gone through them verbally, take time and give a description of each technique, which you should have already done on that form, and then 2 strengths and 2 limitations. And always try and do point, explain, point, explain. Don't just give the point. Try and develop it further. Now, an exam question. Woohoo! I do like a STEM question. A psychologist used an independent group design to investigate whether or not a cognitive interview was more effective than a standard interview in recalling information. For this experiment, participants were recruited from an advertisement placed in the local paper. The advertisement informed the participants that they would be watching a film of a violent crime and that they would be interviewed about the content by a male officer. So we've got a nice STEM. Question A, name the sampling technique used in this experiment. 1 mark. Now, let's look at the command word name. Name literally means that we just need to state what it is. So technically 1 word can get you that. Let's look at question 2. Suggest 1 limitation of using this sampling technique. So again, it's this sampling technique. It suggests 1 limitation. So it's only 1 limitation. It's worth 2 marks. And that means we give their point and explain our point. Now it says of using this sampling technique. The word this is talking about the sampling technique. It's not talking about in relationship to this research. So it doesn't really need to be applied. But if you do make that link to the STEM, that's fine. It's not a problem. If you don't, that's not a problem either, because there's no applications. So pause it here now and answer the questions. Right, great. I'm glad you paused. I really hope you have paused, because practicing this makes your skills stronger and also helps develop your knowledge. Right, so let's look at question A. Name the sampling technique used in this experiment. Well, sorry, let's go back. You should have picked up in here. For this experiment, participants were recruited from an advertisement placed in a local paper. There you go. Right? Local paper, an advert was put in. So they were expecting people to respond to that. So all you had to do was write their volunteer or self-selected. One word could get you that 1 mark because it just says name. So a volunteer sample or self-selected sample will get you your marks. Now let's just go back to our second question. Suggest one limitation of using this sampling technique, 2 marks. Now, you don't need to apply it because it doesn't say suggest one limitation of using this sampling technique for this research or apply it, refer to the research. They're not giving you any application words. So it is an unrepresentative sample. So that will get me my 1 mark for my point, as you may only get certain type of individual who read that specific local newspaper volunteering. Now, this answer from a student, this was a student's answer, they have applied it, which is fine, it still gets the marks, but you don't need to have applied it. So you could say it is an unrepresentative sample, as you may only get a certain individual or person who has seen the advert or the poster, because that's how you get them. You've got to put up something or notice. Here's your marks. I've also put another one. Volunteer bias, because that can be, right? Volunteer bias, as there may be certain individuals who like to volunteer or are highly motivated to be part of the experiment. Now, again, they've applied it into crime recording. We don't even need that to still get the 2 marks. So 1 mark for saying volunteer bias and the second mark for the explain. 2 marks. Remember, always look at the mark allocation. 2 marks. Remember, go on to the idea of understanding the question. I do have a short video on that. Again, I know we've done it in class, but it's worthwhile going over again because it does help you understand the questions. Well, my lovelies, thank you for your time and your effort, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care, everybody.